got like 0 wind. So I'm actually going to do some motor tests today. And then I'm going to run the motor at 1 knot, 2 knots, 3 knots, 4 knots, and 5 knots of boat speed. And I'm just going to record the amp draw that I'm getting at those speeds. So I'm going to take it. Now what I heard is that if I put up my mainsail, it's actually going to create a bit of lift and actually make it easier for me to motor sail, like basically motor sailing. So when I get to 3 knots, I'm going to try that. I'm going to keep this really low. So simple. Okay, the charging amps right now, because I'm under load, I couldn't figure out how to disconnect. So what I said, I'll just take out 4.5. Right now it's putting, the solar is putting in 4 amps, 4.1 amps, and it's not going to do much more than that. So I'll keep checking it at my speeds, but basically the motor barely on. I'm doing 1.5 knots. I'm using 1 amp plus my 4 from the solar, so it's 5 amps. So it's saying I've actually got 1 amp going in, so I'm using 3 amps. Actually, it's backwards. It's actually positive amps. So I've got more solar than I've got going in, and my speed over ground is 1.5. Close enough, 1.5. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Let's see if I can get this to 2 knots. Okay, 2. So 2 knots. So I'm doing 3.4 amps, and it's still putting in 4.2 amps. So it's basically 7 amps for 2 knots of boat speeds. 2, 5, 8 amps. 4 and 3, right? 7 amps. So knots. Actually, you know what, I'll do 2.5. Let's just lower that a bit. 2.7, 2.6. See if I can peg 2.5. Okay, so I'm doing 2.5 knots. It's 6.8 amps, 6.9 amps. And right now I've got 3.3 amps going in. Alright, so now let's bring it up to 3 knots. 2.9, there we go. So right here, so 10 amps, 3 knots. So 10 amps, 11 amps, and then on my wattage I'm doing 2.8. So 11, so it's about 13 amps to do 3 knots. Maybe a better test here would be how fast can I go with 25 amps of current, because that's where my battery is about, like, it's not hurting the battery. It's like that's my peak battery draw at 25 amps. So I'm doing 24 right now, but I have a little bit of solar in there, so that's cheating. So right now I'm not damaging my batteries. And I'm doing 3.4 knots. Okay, so peak speed is 3.4 knots. And my voltage is now 49. Okay, and then my solar input right now. The solar is a little bit jumpy because of the sawing, so 2.8 knots. And I'm just going to take a picture of that. 3.3 knots, so it just dropped to 3.3. So 40 amps. Okay, so now I'm pushing my battery limits here, but 47.5, so 50 amps, and I'm at 4 knots, so 4.1 knots. And I just did the next screen capture, so I'll try to overlay these into some way that makes sense. But basically I got to 4 knots, sorry, I got to 4 knots, but then my battery voltage was going into 47 volts, so less than 48. I don't like running it there because it's basically that's where my that's where I'm hurting the batteries. So I'm actually killing the life if I run them like that too long. And I'm going to pull the main sail up, and then I'm going to recheck all of those speeds with the mainsail up. I'm going to try to do my minimum 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.3 was where I got at 25 amps, and then I'll just get me out of 4 knots and then see what comparative amp draw is. So if it's less with the mainsail up. Sheet, and I'm just going to pull that back a little bit, keep the sheet a little bit tight. Okay. Alright, so 1.5 amps I'm taking out, sorry, 1.6 knots. Come on, slow down. It's hard to tell at this speed. I think my error margin's pretty high at low speeds, because all the instruments are trying to figure out where I am, what's going on, what speed. Okay, so it's saying 1.6 knots. I'm putting in 1.4 amps. And so let's try this one. And then my solar is 4.1 amps. And it's 1.5, it's just lowered to 1.5. So I'm going to bring this to 2 knots now. So that was 1.5 nautical miles, and I was actually putting energy into the battery. So, alright, 2 knots. So I'm using 3.2 amps, and battery charging right now is 4.1 amps. So I'm using 6 amps, basically. 7 amps, 3. Yeah, I'm using 7 amps, 2.1 knots. All right, so bring this up to 2.5. 2.5, there we go. So it's 4.83 amps, and the solar is inputting 4.1 amps still, 250 watts. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up to 3 now. .9, 3. Okay, so we're doing 10.85 and 4.1 amps in. That's 3. Alright, so let's see where 25 amps brings us. Alright, so it's saying 3.5 knots, and I'm doing 24.9 amps, and the solar is putting in, actually 3.6 knots I'm just touching on, 4.1, 4.2, so I'm doing 3.6 knots, so I am getting a little bit better, just a smidgen better here with the sail up, like 0.2, so obviously if there's some wind, that could be the wind, but I don't know. To me, there's still very little wind out here. Alright, so I'm going to just pump this up and see what it takes to get to 4 knots. Alright, so I'm doing 4.2 knots. I'm using 40 amps, 39 amps, 38. That might be the sun flipping it around. But yeah, I know it's hanging steady at 4.2. So I'm using 38 amps, and then my solar is putting in 4.1 amps. Not too many boats out here today because of the what's it called? I'm gonna just turn this while I'm here. Because of the light wind, basically all the sailboats are, like, it's not even worth being out. Well, I found this test interesting. Here's the results kind of plotted out here just on a graph. It's not quite linear, the graph, but it does give an idea of what's happening. There was like a 5 to 10% gain by having the sail up. That's definitely, it took less energy. I didn't quite see it when I was doing it, but after looking at the data, there was a slight improvement actually, which was interesting. It was what you'd expect, logarithmic type scale. The slower you go, the less power you need. The faster you go, exponentially, the more power that you need. So I didn't do 5 knots because I just don't like pushing my batteries more than the 25 amps. So for me, at the 25 amp mark, my peak speed was 3.3 knots without the sail, and it was 3.6 knots with the sail. So like I said, there was definitely a 5 to 10% gain by having the sail up. So anyways, hopefully this information here is useful, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the channel or here on the video. Love doing this kind of stuff, just trying to share the knowledge that I'm learning here as I go. Cheers! Yep, there you go. We did 1K. I just want to analyze the data, and then what I'll do is I'll print a chart up of what's going on the sorry, a spider dropped on my head.